This is my most important guitar. It's the only guitar I own that I've ever played live, it's the guitar that's been with me for the longest, and the guitar I've got the most connection with. So this begs the question, why am I boxing it up to ship it across to the other side of the country for an irreversible and controversial modification that requires routing out most of the wood of the body? The answer is this. This is the EverTune bridge. Let's talk about why I did this modification and whether or not it was worth it. Now, this video is sponsored as EverTune paid for the installation of this bridge in part. However, with how much this guitar means to me, no amount of sponsorship could bias my opinion on the matter in any way. The work was carried out by Shuka Basses. I'll leave a link to their shop in the description box down below. They're the UK's only official EverTune retrofit service. So some retrofits require a small riser plate, especially on thin-bodied guitars like maybe an SG for instance. However, mine luckily was just about thick enough not to need one. As you can see on the B cam, this looks maybe the same as a regular backplate, if not slightly bigger. So yeah, pretty normal installation really. Tremolo bridges will require a small plug where the sort of trem arm would be, but this was done perfectly by Shuka. I'll add some B-roll up on screen of this because he's made it look close to invisible. The work took 3 weeks to complete, and I think even that was a longer than usual wait time, so I can recommend his services wholeheartedly. So before I talk about why I'm going with the EverTune system, I really just want to plug this in. I've just opened the box. I haven't had a chance to plug it in yet, and I'm just excited. So forgive me, this is just going to be my first playthrough. All the sound demos you're hearing in this video are going to be through ML Sound Labs amped block letter. They're all going to be the same preset for the most part, other than the clean tones, of course. So what is the EverTune bridge? Well, as the name would suggest, it keeps your guitar forever in tune. What this means is that I can pick the guitar up by the strings and it'll stay in tune. The springs on each saddle counteract the tension of the string and ensure that your guitar stays in tune no matter what. Now, this perfect tuning system really helps with studio in particular, where you've got two different guitar takes either side. If one's slightly out of tune from the other, you can really hear it, and this will counteract that perfectly. However, there are a myriad of other benefits to the EverTune system that people don't really talk about. It counteracts for your finger pressure on the fret, so if you press slightly too hard, the note doesn't go sharp like it would with a regular bridge. The main feature of the EverTune bridge for me is actually that it counteracts pitch drift. This is that rise in pitch whenever you pluck a note. I will say the pitch drift on the EverTune isn't completely resolved, and this actually works in your favour. You don't want two guitars that are 100% locked in, or you'll get phase issues. What it does is it mitigates it significantly. So rather than getting, say, 50 cents of pitch drift, you're more likely to get between 5 and 10 depending on your string gauge. I'll add a quick comparison of a regular guitar versus an EverTune equipped guitar with the tuner open just to show you what I mean here. So this is a non-EverTune guitar. And this is with an EverTune. You may be wondering why I chose to get rid of the PRS bridge in the first place. This is mainly because I don't like tremolo bridges. I'd never use the whammy bar or anything like that, so I had it decked off anyway, and it just seemed right to put an EverTune in this after I tried the EverTune on my Solar 29-inch baritone, as well as my brand new Balaguer Custom. Another reason I wanted to get rid of the stock bridge on this PRS is that it was getting quite old and I'd worn right through to the pot metal inside, and that was quite rough and coarse on my hand, which I didn't really like. It's fair to say I've got a lot of belief in the EverTune system, and I've really liked what it's done to my other guitars so far, so this sort of felt like a no-brainer. Now, I'd love to say it's a total no-brainer, but sending my guitar away for such a scary, irreversible modification definitely took a long time for me to plan out. I was thinking about it for like a year, maybe 2 years, kept on talking about it, kept on saying I was going to do it, and kept chickening out. But after speaking to EverTune, and they graciously offered to subsidize some of the costs for it, I figured I just ought to go for it. So now let's hear it in the context of a full metal mix. I've currently got this one set up in drop C with 10.5 to 62 gauge drop set from Windspear strings. A lot of people say that the EverTune bridge takes away the soul of your guitar. It makes it feel lifeless and dead, and it stops sustaining. This guitar was already pretty dead sounding to begin with not a ton of sustain or resonance, and I'm happy to say that the EverTune doesn't seem to have made any real difference to that. I have got a bunch of tests with it plugged in, and I'll run through those now. These first sustain tests are going to be panned hard left and right, with the before clips on the left and the after clips on the right. This is so that the level meter shows both at the same time, and you can accurately see sort of where each of the sustains are. So from that test, you can see that the sustain isn't completely linear. The first 5 seconds or so are about the same. However, when it does start to drop off, the EverTune drops off quite a lot faster than the non-EverTune variant of this guitar. That shouldn't really affect too many people. I mean, how often are you going to be sustaining a note longer than 5 seconds without introducing some kind of Gary Moore-esque feedback from the amp or stacked gain on gain thing to give you that artificial sustain? I don't think I've ever put a 5-second sustained note in a song, let alone anything longer than that. And as a friend of mine mentioned, if you're really worried about that, you can just throw in a Sustainiac pickup and let that take care of it. The next tests you hear are going to be tone tests. These are going to be quick A-B comparisons with the guitars in mono, so that you can quickly hear the differences between the guitar before and after. So the results of the tone test show that there is a difference between the EverTune bridge and the regular PRS bridge. The EverTune is noticeably brighter, however I actually really like that, especially for this guitar. I found the before clips to be a little dark and lacking in clarity, but it now sounds really punchy, aggressive and modern. So my conclusion for all of the A/B testing things, I'd say tonally at least there are absolutely no negatives to the EverTune bridge for what I'm doing. This may vary depending on what you're doing with your guitar. However, I'm 100% happy with these A/B tests. So I covered this in my EverTune myth-busting video, which I'll leave a link to in the description box down below, but a lot of people seem to think that you can't bend notes on an EverTune. Let me show you why this myth exists. So I've got the EverTune set up in the middle of zone 2, which is an EverTune thing. This means that you can't bend the notes whatsoever. No matter how much force I put into bending this note, it's not going to change pitch. This means that your vibrato is dead, any sort of bending is dead, and it's a very strange experience, but it works really great, especially in the studio when you know you don't have any bends in the song. However, when we tune the guitar up to the cusp between zone 2 and zone 3, that's when you can start getting some bending action. So now I should be able to bend like normal. As I mentioned, I did a whole video running through a bunch of different EverTune myths like this, and it's really worth checking out if you're interested in the EverTune system. So for the pros and cons of the EverTune bridge. Firstly, for the cons. It's a pretty costly install. The bridge alone is £350 and the install costs on top of that are about £150. Now I got mine subsidised slightly by EverTune, but you can expect to pay between £500 and £600 for this kind of job. Something that's going to depend on what bridge you're retrofitting over is the attack your pick has on the string. There is something of a spongy feel to your pick attack when you're attacking the strings, however this is no different to any other trem system for instance. This is because the nature of the springs absorbs some of the impact, whereas like a direct mount hardtail for instance has nothing to absorb this impact. This means that all of the energy on a regular hardtail is transferred directly to the strings. Another con is that it will change the weight of your guitar, at least in 99% of cases. For example, this PRS was £6 12 ounces when I first weighed it, and now that it's back it weighs £7. Not a massive difference, but it's definitely noticeable. It's got a slight more heft in the back end of it now. This is going to vary depending on what wood your guitar's made of, what density your guitar is, what bridge you're replacing it with, so take this one as you will. It's going to vary a lot depending on what you're doing. Another con is that it will affect the resale value of your guitar. You won't get that full £500 back, as with most modifications really, but you may even see a drop in value after equipping it with an EverTune, depending on what you've done obviously. If it's on a sort of metal oriented guitar, you may get away with it, but if it's on something like a Gretsch, you may have some more issues. Lastly, for the potential cons, but you know, for me this is a pro, the look of the bridge may not be for everyone. It's quite a big, blocky looking bridge. I personally like that, especially in this rustic aged finish that I've got on the S2, but I know that not everyone's going to enjoy this. So we've got a ton of pros to go through. Firstly, it's incredibly comfortable under the hand. It's one of the nicest bridges to hold because it really just doesn't have any sort of sharp edges to it. Everything's nicely rounded, it feels comfortable and smooth. Next, we've got the tuning stability, obviously the big part of the EverTune bridge, being able to just pick it up by the strings and it still be in tune after. That's huge for pretty much every player. I mean, you can really rag this thing, you can beat the ever-loving hell out of it, and it will just stay in tune regardless. It arrived in perfect tune from shipping, which is pretty fantastic really. Next is my main one, the pitch drift. The lack of pitch drift means that two guitar takes are going to be perfectly in tune all the time, and that's huge for metal guitar players that like a nice tight sounding guitar take. Another massive pro is that the EverTune counteracts the finger pressure with intonation across the fretboard. This is huge for me because, you know, my technique isn't fantastic. It works for me, but I do find myself gripping a little bit too hard all the time. So should you get an EverTune retrofitted into your guitar? This is obviously going to come down to your tastes, your needs, and your use cases. However, for me, I'd say absolute no-brainer. The only real functional negative for me is going to be the price, and that's probably going to prohibit me from being able to do too many EverTune installs on my guitars. However, I don't think it's really that unreasonable. It costs about the same as a good Floyd Rose bridge if we're talking about the raw cost of the bridges alone, and the installation costs are pretty valid considering how much wood you have to remove from the guitar to get the EverTune fitted. I would love to retrofit all of my guitars with an EverTune, especially my Balaguer Espada synthwave that I got recently. However, when you're talking about cheap guitars like my Yamaha Revstar for instance, it's almost cheaper to buy something like a used Solar that's already got an EverTune rather than to retrofit the Revstar. So that is everything that I've got for this video. If you'd like to see the full story of my PRS guitar and how much it means to me, I'll leave a link on screen for you to check that one out. Otherwise, I just want to thank EverTune for sponsoring this video and Shuka for doing such an incredible job on the installation on this guitar.